I know. It's too good. Yeah.
Good evening. Mike Hawk, can you hear me? Okay, good. My name is Dr. Jerry Hill. I'm the superintendent of the West Bloomfield School District. And tonight we have a legislative community forum. And I'm going to have our school board vice president, Carol Finkelstein, and our PCN president, Kelly Denowitz, say a couple of words of introduction. And then we'll get into introductions of the panel, and I'll go through the agenda, and we'll get the show on the road. So, ladies.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. I'd like to welcome everyone from the public for taking time out of their evening to be here to meet your new legislators. I also want to really thank all of our legislators and the Chief of Staff for coming on this snowy day to come and meet your constituents. We are really excited to have you here and to hear all the wonderful things that you're going to be doing in your new positions. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Denowitz so she can welcome you on behalf of the PCN.
Thank you. Hi, thank you as well to all the PCN, the Parent Communication Network parents and community members and association members. Thank you for joining tonight. We're really excited for you to have the opportunity to hear some of the updates from our new legislators, as well as ask questions and hear your answers and learn, and just welcome and coming out on this evening again. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol and Kelly. At this point, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves. All right. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Ryan Berman. Glad you guys can make it out tonight. I'm the new state representative for the 39th district, which is the western half of West Bloomfield, Commerce Township, Wolverine Lake, and Wixom. Obviously, the West Bloomfield School District encompasses a lot of that area, and the rest of it is the 40th district.
So I'm State Representative Mari Manubian. I represent the 40th district, which includes all of Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, Bloomfield Township, and the portion of West Bloomfield that Representative Berman doesn't have. I have 5 different school districts in my district. I have Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, Farmington Hills, West Bloomfield, Avondale, and I actually might have a little bit of Pontiac as well, so maybe close to 6. So I'm happy to be here tonight.
Thank you. Newly elected state representative Jim Runstead for the 15th Senate District, and have all of West Bloomfield in my district. And I have not sat on the Education Committee in the past, so that is where you get a lot of the real in-depth information, but I've tried to study as best I can, and I've tried to advocate that we increase the foundation grant, that we begin to, which we've been doing, working away at that big separation in the cost differential between schools, as well as a categorical for paying for the transportation, which is a huge issue to a lot of districts. So really happy to be here and learn and see what we can learn tonight, and also impart some information. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Ryder, and I am Chief of Staff to Senator Rosemary Bayer, which is District 12. Senator Bayer has asked me to please express her regrets for not being able to make it. She is on the other side of the state at another meeting that was scheduled long ago. So she asked me to come and to listen to everything everyone has to say, to take notes, to bring it back to her. I can tell you she is very, very strong supporter of public education and wants to do everything she can to help all the, I believe, 12 school districts we have in our district and all the school districts around the state.
So therein lies one of the challenges that we have as school district, because and the representatives and senators have. It's not a one-to-one relationship. There's a lot of overlap. But tonight's meeting, there's a lot of commonalities, in particular when we talk about education. And we're going to get to a presentation in just a moment from Steve Wasco, and I'll introduce that. But prior to that, there are a couple of special presentations that I believe first Senator Runstead wants to make, and then Representative Berman wants to make. So, Senator, if you would mind.
Thank you. I'd like to invite up Andrew Schaefer. Good to meet you. Is your mother here?
I do.
Come up as well.
Wasn't expecting this.
He wasn't expecting this. Got to the point, we didn't want him to expect it. But I have here a proclamation from Murray Manoogian, the state representative, and myself, Jim Runstead, state senator. And Andrew has done, as many of you who know him, a spectacular job as a volunteer here in the district. And so I'm going to read the proclamation that we have produced for him. As a student trustee of West Bloomfield Township, let it be known that it is with great joy that we commend Andrew Schaefer on being appointed student trustee for West Bloomfield Township. This distinguished tribute is awarded to students who show exceptional aptitude for civil service and go above and beyond their regular duties. Andrew Schaefer is a senior at West Bloomfield High School, where he excels both inside and outside the classroom. He continually seeks out academic challenges by enrolling in several different advanced placement and honors courses, earning GPAs higher than 4.0 each year of his high school career. Furthermore, Andrew has actively taken leadership roles in extracurricular activities such as serving on the executive board of Model United Nations and serving as secretary of his National Honor Society chapter. This well-rounded and outstanding individual incorporates public service to his life and daily actions. He has volunteered his time for presidential, congressional, and mayoral campaigns, put his political beliefs into action. He also serves his fellow constituents as a congressional intern, assists with correspondence of citizens by answering their calls and drafting letters to respond to their concerns. Andrew is well acquainted with many of his local elected officials, frequently travels to Lansing to stay informed on the happenings of state legislature. Andrew has demonstrated true dedication towards representing and serving his community, and for this he is to be commended. So in special tribute, therefore, this document is signed and dedicated to Andrew Schaefer, student trustee of West Bloomfield Township. May he know of our esteem and our best wishes for continued success of his endeavors. Congratulations.
I believe we have another presentation from our two representatives.
So January is designated as School Board Appreciation Month. And in recognition of that, I would like to invite the school board, West Bloomfield School Board members that are here today. We have a special tribute here for you guys.
So I'm happy to read it. Let it be known that it is with great respect and gratitude for your service that we extend our highest praise and commendation in commemoration of School Board Recognition Month in Michigan. Public education is vital to the enrichment of our society, as it prepares our youth to become successful and productive citizens, able to meet the challenges of our changing world. You deserve recognition for the role you play in helping maintain high standards and meaningful results.
We commend your tireless efforts and leadership in making important educational decisions. As a board member, you are forced to undertake the difficult tasks of appropriating finances and making complex decisions on behalf of students, parents, taxpayers, and educators. Education has and will remain an important priority for the growth of young minds everywhere. As the old adage says, what you put in, you get out. Investing in education now offers promise for generations to come. In special tribute, therefore, this document is signed and dedicated to recognize your leadership and honor of School Board Recognition Month. May you know of our heartfelt appreciation for your important efforts to educate the people of the Great Lakes State.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Does anybody else have something they want to honor somebody with? Thank you very much. This evening we're continuing our program with an educational piece We have a representative from the Michigan School Finance Research Collaborative, Steve Wasco here. And actually it's homecoming for Mr. Wasco because he was in the West Bloomfield School District for many years. I think your last position was an assistant superintendent. And he's gone on to Detroit, now he's doing other things. And other things being, in addition to all his other work with the School Finance Research Collaborative, and he's going to make a presentation this evening that we will follow up with questions and answers. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Wasco.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Does that work? Does that work? Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Hill. It is good to be back in West Bloomfield. It was home for a long time. Good to see Nick and Cindy and others as well, and Chief, certainly. I'd appreciate that. I should say, in addition to my service here, my wife served in this building for 25 years, leading as an assistant principal of this building before moving on to another role. So it's good to be here. It's usually helpful in discussing a topic as weighty as school finance, maybe to get a sense of the knowledge of the group or the sense of the group as to where they're coming from the issue. So just a couple setup questions. Raise your hand if you think in the state of Michigan we're funding schools the right way. We've got it right in terms of funding schools. Everybody raise their hand if you think we're doing that right now. Okay, that's good. Raise your hand if you think, despite the amount that we're funding, too much, too little, that we've got it right in terms of determining the right level of resources for all the different characteristics, all the different kinds, all the different circumstances that students find themselves in when they come to our classrooms and that. Everybody think we got that right? Okay, good. The tricky question may be, Proposal A, who remembers Proposal A? Was Proposal A an effort to reform the way we fund schools in terms of the way that we allocate funds, in terms of the way we select, the way we give those funds to districts, in terms of following the needs of the student? Is that the purpose of Proposal A? No. Yeah, suppose. Actually, no, it really was a tax issue. It was not an education reform issue. It successfully shifted taxes in a way that was needed for a long period of time, and it certainly did a lot, as was noted in one of the earlier comments, in terms of the equity between the lower funded districts and the higher funded districts. But it wasn't something that the research study that I'm going to present to you tonight started out with the basic question of what do we need, what does it take to educate each individual child in the state of Michigan. So that really was what that was about. This is something different. This is the first time in the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan joins 31 other states now having done a school adequacy study. And so it's a good company to be with those other states as well. And I just want to make sure this is being picked up because I can't tell if it's being picked up. Okay, great. So I have the pleasure of being the co-chair of the Public Engagement Committee of a group called the School Finance Reform Collaborative. And the School Finance Reform Collaborative is indeed a diverse group of business leaders, education leaders from across the state. And there's a couple of slides I'm going to show here, not to get into the detail, but really to say a couple of things. One is that this effort started right here in Oakland County, at Oakland Schools, with Deputy Superintendent Bob Moore really talking about school adequacy and equity funding long before anybody thought it was popular to do that. And our fiduciary is the Oakland Schools Educational Foundation. West Bloomfield's own Barb DeMarco is one of the trustees for that as well. But more importantly, if an idea just starts in Oakland County and is in the Tri-County area and doesn't float across the entire state, it probably doesn't have a chance of getting the kind of support that it needs to really be a major school reform effort in that. So you see that in terms of the members of the collaborative, they represent all parts of the state, north, south, east, west. They represent the higher education, business, and other communities. Our funding comes from diverse sources as well. Our major funder has been the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in terms of helping to get the word out to the Public Engagement Committee, but also the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation and the Skillman Foundation, and notably 32 of Michigan's 56 intermediate school districts have contributed funds to engage this effort as well. And if you look at a map of the intermediate school districts across the state, the wording is kind of hard to read. But basically, you see representation from across the state of intermediate school districts either passing board resolutions in support of the SFRC findings and or providing financial support or both. So that's important, again, in terms of when we talk about this to lawmakers and policymakers and the new governor and others, to say this is a really statewide initiative in the truest sense of the word. And that's not always been the case with education issues. So let's start with a couple of other premises. So we often talk about the broken system, the broken funding system. Let's just look at a couple of financial facts here. So in 2016, Michigan ranked 24th in per pupil K-12 spending. And we do a lot of talking across the state that we want to be one of those top 10 states. We want to be top 10 in education. We can name a number of those top 10 states because we spend a lot of time talking about it. But we happen to be 24th in K-12 spending. And what's worse than that, the 24th ranking, is really the direction that we're going, because as recently as 2000, we ranked 8th, and now we rank 24th. And the ranking is one indicator of that, probably more so is the indicator of the actual number of dollars spent on each student. And again, we're going the wrong direction in comparison to our peers across the country. So since 2000, Michigan's inflation-adjusted per pupil spending has fallen by $663 per pupil. At the same time, the U.S. average has increased by $1,400 per pupil. So that gap increasing and widening as opposed to getting closer. So therein lies a number of the problems in the funding system. So I noted the fact that Michigan joined a year ago the company of 31 other states across the country that had employed 2 research firms. These same research firms have done this research in each of the other states that has chosen to do a school funding adequacy study. And the study was done throughout the course of 2016 and early 2017. 2017 and early 2018, and released in January, February of 2018. And we've been consciously trying to go around the state to get the word out ever since, because there's a lot of good reports out there that sit on the shelf after they're released, and we didn't want this to be one of those reports. I could go into great detail for the educators in the room on all the research methodology, and you can find all that in the full versions of this presentation on our website, fundmyschools.org, fundmyschools.org. But suffice it to say, there were 2 methodologies that were chosen to use. One is really to look at best practices across the country in those states that we hold in high esteem, Massachusetts, Florida, Tennessee, where we say they're doing the right thing in terms of their public education. What are they doing? And it's not about the funding. We looked at what are the educational practices. What are the appropriate class size averages at the early L level? What is the student to counselor ratio? What is the ratio for special education students to adults in the room? And a whole host of things. But that would be one thing, that would be one measure of determining where we want to be. The other important method, and these researchers used both, was to engage panels of Michigan educators. Almost 300 Michigan educators, including teachers, educators, superintendents, special education directors, ELL teachers, and the like, participated in, even charter school educators, participated in panels to reflect on the fact that if we wanted to do these things that we see are the best practices in the states that are doing well in public education, what does that look like in our particular state? And those panels really fueled us. So doing both of those really brings both eyes, both perspectives to the work. And utilizing those 2 approaches really allowed the study team to estimate both the cost of meeting the full state standards for all students at a base level, along with the additional costs associated with differences in district student characteristics. And I'm going to spend the rest of my short presentation talking about those 2 things. The cost of meeting the full state standards, because there are some that will say this is just about funding. Some might even say this is just about providing more funding for those schools. But it really is about identifying what are the practices that are necessary to be able to achieve well, to make sure that we've already passed the standards, the different the tests, the standardized tests, and that sort of thing. What does it take to provide the resources to make sure that our students across the state, in all of the different circumstances, can succeed in that environment? And secondly, what are the differentiations amongst that funding? Because right now we have a one-size-fits-all approach to that funding. We have a foundation grant that is the same for students regardless of the ELL services needed, regardless of whether or not they're in poverty. We have some categoricals that are embarrassingly small on a pro rata basis for at-risk and for students in poverty and that sort of thing, as opposed to saying, what is the true cost of educating those students in all those different circumstances? And again, so the research really reflects upon the fact, what does it take to provide the resources necessary, what are the programs necessary to make sure that students can succeed on these things that have already been implemented. When they were implemented, regrettably, we didn't have the conversation about what it takes to succeed in these. We implemented that, and then we said, let's go ahead and do them. So before I start, well, as I bring the first recommendation on, my colleague Ron Cato, so we have co-chairs of the Public Engagement Committee, again, to make sure that this is a report that gets wide attention across the state so everyone can have a chance to view it, interact with policymakers, and the like. But he really reflects on the fact that the current system is really a one-size-fits-all. And the problem with that has been is that the way that we've approached the yearly conversation about school funding has tended to be competing priorities for the same pool of revenues, which may go up or may go down in a particular year, but not really a conversation about how we divide those revenues in an appropriate way to meet those students' needs. So that really has devolved many years into a conversation with adults, talking about how do we compete for those priorities, as opposed to really talking about a new system. So with Ron for giving this presentation, he would say that we need to, the current foundation method is the foundation grant. And he would talk and use language such as we need to kick the foundation grant habit, that we really need to just completely change the way that we approach the funding system and the funding formula. And that's the most important thing. That probably is more important than the actual additional resources that are needed as the first steps in this process. And that's what we found when we talked to some of the other states that have implemented similar programs, to really get a changed funding formula in and then begin to see how many years, et cetera, that it would take to fully fund that. So the report is 358 pages. If you've got trouble on a snowy night falling asleep, it's on the website as well. And there's different versions and short versions of this presentation and other things. But ostensibly, there's 6 key recommendations and then some data points that really flesh those out. So the first recommendation is that the base cost to educate a regular K-12 student in Michigan, regular education student, is $9,590. That's not what the amount is right now, as everyone probably knows. And that does not include, importantly, transportation, food service, or capital costs. It only includes pension costs at 4.6% of wages. And 4.6%, Dr. Hill, your business official, every year when he prepares the draft budget, the district contribution to pension costs is 20%?
Closer to 30%.
Closer to 30%. You get the memo every year that says it's going to go up, it's not 4.6%. So, the second piece is that in addition to that base cost, the $9,590 per pupil, that there should be increments for students in special education, students that are English language learners, students living in poverty, as well as an additional 10% of the base cost for CTE, Career Technical Program, enrolled students. And then we also reflected upon the fact that enrollment size has an impact, particularly for the smaller districts, the smallest districts in the state, that do not have the economies of scale that a medium-sized district or a large district has in terms of the administrative superstructure and all those sort of things. And for that, along with many of the recommendations of the report, there's applicability to the charter school funding as well. This report does not take a side on the long-standing debate and issue about traditional public schools versus charter schools. Our recommendations are intended to be representative of the needs of both students in traditional public schools and charter schools as well. And we have charter school leadership representation on our overall collaborative committee as well. So for the smaller districts, the recommendation is that an increment of an additional $1,892 per pupil for a district with a very small district with an enrollment of 670 or fewer students. An additional $717 per pupil for a district with an enrollment of 1,700 students or fewer. And an additional $364 for districts with 5,020 students or less. That would be over and above the base grant of $9,590. The fourth recommendation, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is that charter schools should have the same base per pupil funding for regular education students and the same adjustments to the base amount that traditional students receive. The fifth recommendation, the important years, the early childhood education years, well, it costs $14,155 to successfully educate a child who's age 3 or 4 in preschool in the state of Michigan. If we would have followed the recommendations in the research-driven report about how it's done right in other states. $14,155. And then the recommendation is that for transportation costs, which right now Dr. Hill, I don't want to keep putting you in the spot, but your transportation costs come out of your foundation grant. You don't get any. Every district is different in terms of its transportation needs. On average, we believe that there should be further study in this. On average, there should be $731 allocated for each student to provide the needed transportation. And again, we've gone across the state giving this presentation, and we were in the Upper Peninsula talking to one of the superintendents there, and the Upper Peninsula districts are about that long and about that wide and many, many miles. And the one superintendent has to spend $1,300 a year out of his per pupil foundation grant on transportation. It's not because he's running an inefficient transportation system or his bus drivers make too much money or anything like that. It simply is the fact that his district is very wide and very long, and he needs to be able to get the kiddies to school every morning and back home every evening. So then I noted the fact that there's 6 basic recommendations, but then again, the report is detailed and comprehensive and goes into great detail about the actual incremental funding for students in each of those circumstances. So again, I'll do this relatively quickly given the time, so we all have time to discuss this, but the base cost at $9,590 for the size adjustment that we talked about earlier, the poverty rate for students in poverty, in additional 0.35 increments. So in effect, 1.35 times $9,590 would be the appropriate funding to meet the additional needs that a student in poverty brings to the classroom for our hardworking educators in all districts, West Bloomfield, Detroit, and across the state. For students in ELL, English language learners at the 3 testing levels on the WIDA assessment, WIDA levels 1 and 2, an increment of 0.7, so 1.7 times 9,590. For WIDA levels 3 and 4, 0.5, and for 5 and 6, etc., 0.35. For special education, again, 3 levels, 0.7 for mild impairments, 1.15 for students in the moderate category. And for students in the severe category, the recommendation is that the state should reimburse 100% of that it simply makes no sense to have districts where an individual student's education to do it successfully might be 20, 30, 42,000 hours per pupil, that really should just be accounted for directly by the state. As noted earlier, we've got 10% adjustment for students that are in CTE enrolled programs, preschool funding at $14,155. And for the isolation districts, those that again are just in the far, far rural areas, an increment of 4/100ths of a percent. These are again the 2 firms that did the research and the 2 methodologies. They use the evidence-based as the National Best Practices Review, and the professional judgment approach is the Michigan panels of educators at all levels. We also stopped short and didn't do research and call for additional research for capital costs for both traditional and public schools in terms of how the best way is to accommodate the funding needs of that. And a further review of illiterate and literate poverty and the concentration of poverty by district. As noted earlier, Michigan joins now, it's up to 32 states that have conducted this study, and you see on that many of the states that again hold in high esteem as they're getting it right in terms of how they approach their public schools and the public education systems. So the report provides a building block for a new school funding formula, and what we've been doing on the public engagement committee since we've been in existence last summer, and this is a nonpartisan issue in the truest sense of the word, and it's not meant to be a political issue, but when the report came out, we were in an election year, so we certainly took the opportunity to make sure that we shared with every candidate for office and at every level, local, House of Representatives, Senate, and the statewide offices, the full information packet on this information, and for every candidate who made it to the primary election, made it to the general election, sent another set of information to make sure that it was received, and hopefully that was the case in your offices as well, legislators. We sent a note after the election as well, after the general election. And since that time, we've been having conversations. There are going to be some meetings with the governor's staff to begin to look at what this means in terms of the next step for her various presentations, the important presentations, the state of the state, and the budget message, etc., coming up quickly. The other key piece of this, and I know we'll have discussion about this, but normally in a non-legislative forum presentation of this, I would go on further to talk about ways that you all can be engaged, because really the goal here is to simply disseminate this information across the state, to make sure that we can have conversations about it across the state. So in West Bloomfield and in every other district, we're really hoping that at the board level, there could be a resolution passed that endorses the findings of the SFRC. And in our toolkit that's on our website provided through the ISDs, there's a template for that, and it could be tailored. And it gives you a chance to discuss it, have a mini presentation at a board meeting. If the board meetings are covered by cable TV and that sort of stuff, again, a chance to continue to get the word out. We also hope that in every district there could be conversations in 6 key constituency areas. One, of course, would be the teachers, the union leadership, the other educators and staff in the district, for the superintendent really to just call a conversation in the appropriate way with the leadership. The leadership for the 2 key teachers unions across the state have been involved with this from the very beginning and are certainly supportive of it as well. The second most important, well, just as important, of course, the parent groups. Have a conversation such as this one tonight with the key parent groups, the PCN, the PTAs as well. We've made this presentation to the statewide PTA conference, and they're supportive of it as well. So for districts elsewhere that have a PTA version of their parent group, those leadership would find support from their statewide parent leaders as well. The third group would really be community leaders, the nonprofit groups, the service agencies, the service clubs, the clergy associations, and all those that gather to take an opportunity to share that as well. An important group, and this is really key, the business leaders in every community. Because the key, we talked to the leaders in Massachusetts who helped to get this kind of thing endorsed some years ago about a number of things, strategy, how long it took, and that sort of stuff. But in all these states, the key, the really distinctive thing was business leaders and education leaders coming together in a trusting, transparent way to really attack this. Not to have a report that comes out from a business group, a report that comes out from an education group, and all, and then we get together and talk about, but really to have unison in that, to have transparency, and to then talk to the hard issues to get the recommendations funded, implemented and funded where appropriate. I say that to say at the local community group, it'd be important to engage the local business leaders who already have confidence in Dr. Hill and the Board of Education, in the case of West Bloomfield, and every other community, because they're in your schools all the time and they know what you're doing and they know what it takes and the challenges that you're facing, because I'm sure you've shared those before. And then finally, the media in each local community case as well. So I'm going to stop there, given the time of the night, so we can have some discussion and questions, and really appreciate the opportunity. There are all kinds of resources on our website, fundmyschools.org. fundmischools.org. There's a video that's very helpful for showing to community groups or putting on a table or what have you, and everything else that you can imagine. I believe you have copies of 2 one-page fact sheets as well. I won't go into those in detail right now if there are questions about them, but kind of summarize the work as well. Note especially the second of the 2 fact sheets, which really describes, kind of brings it down, what would this look like in my school or my district? So we've hesitated to, just cost out the whole study to say this is how much it would be for every district, because there'd be no way to really get an accurate picture of that at this point in time. But what we have done is say, if you were to implement every recommendation in the school financial collaborative report, what would a typical 460 student elementary school look like? What would be the number of students in an early elementary class? What would be the ratio of students to counselors in that? And you'll see how different this is from reality, even in well-funded districts and districts that really are high achieving in the state of Michigan. And you can imagine how far this is from the norm in districts that are serving students in greater amount of poverty, with lower per pupil funding, etc. So take a look at this if you will as well. And again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve. So at this point, I'm going to give the panelists each an opportunity just to respond in a general way. You'll notice that none of this is written yet in legislative language. It all has to be developed. I think that's where a lot of the collaboration down the road we foresee happening. But just as a concept and as a way to have Michigan become a top 10 in 10, top 10 state in 10 years, we believe that it's a solid foundation. I was at a meeting yesterday with Midwest Education Trust in Detroit, and they were talking about one of the key issues in terms of developing equity in the state of Michigan is to have equitable resources per student. And when they were talking about that, they did refer to this report. as a real good start. But the hard work, the groundwork has been laid, but the hard work is about to happen, or hopefully happen in the legislature. And I would like to hear from our panelists what their initial thoughts are on this and some potential paths forward. Then, as they're talking, there are some cards out by the table. Dan can maybe pass them out. Audience members, if you have questions about this or other topics, write down the questions that you have and get them to Mr. Durgan, and he'll give them to me. I have some questions that were already written by people, so when we get through the legislators' comments on the information we just received, we'll go into a Q&A. So whoever wants to start.
So my wife is a teacher, and she taught in South Lyon Public Schools for a number of years, and now she's back to teaching. She teaches kindergarten at a private school at Temple Israel here in the district. And you look at some of these, some of this research, and you have to look at the underlying assumptions based off of these numbers. And when you look at per pupil funding and things like that, it really matters again when we were doing the presentation of what this is doesn't necessarily translate to West Bloomfield School District or the Up North District and all these other costs go into it. I think that this other sheet here where that example of a 400 student elementary school, that's a good starting off point of looking at what with the research is done is necessary or what they think the minimum staffing level should be. Because, you know, you have, and I think that's one thing that in this research, and I look forward to going onto this website to look at these underlying assumptions and how they come up with a per pupil. Because we see in Michigan have an account day to count how many students are in that district, and the funding kind of goes off of that. But I think it's better when we look to say, what do we want our school to look like? Right now, the current ratio for guidance counselors says it's 729 students to one counselor. That sounds terrible, terrible to me. So the recommendation is 200 students to one. So looking at that, coming back, bringing that into our districts to see, all right, how many students do we have, how it goes there, then to see, add up those costs of, okay, that's going to be, 10 instructors, 10 counselors. Every district pays their teachers different amounts, different rates. I think for us to know what the true cost of running a school, running something, we have to say, oh no, we want $1,000, $2,000 more per pupil. That's not really going to get us there. We have to look at what we want to fund, what type of programs we want to bring into the schools, how much that's all going to cost, and looking at that total number, okay, then you divide it by the kids, and that comes up with your per pupil allocation of that magic number of what you want to get to. So when I'm sitting here thinking or listening to the presentation, it says $9,500. Okay, well, what does that mean? Again, it doesn't have capital costs, food service, transportation. Only 4.6%, and we're talking about 30% for pension costs. So that doesn't even translate us here locally. We need to look at that underlying data, that assumption, but even yet is these report of what the recommended is, what the ideal situation is, what the class size, because I'm looking at the number, it says for early childhood education, 14,000 as opposed to 9,000. What I look at that is what's the difference in money, right? I'm thinking that obviously it has to do with class size. For you want to have a smaller class size for the kids. So that's probably where that goes. But again, I'm looking forward to looking at the underlying data to see how that translates. But more importantly, I think we need to look at what we want to achieve, and then how do we get there.
So I want to speak to a couple points. Obviously, the I've read the study before a couple times, and it's an extensive study that really does go in depth to, that speaks to some of the concerns that Representative Berman just made for you, understanding that the base funding per pupil is just that. It is just a base funding per pupil, and that it allows for every district to understand completely how much it costs per child to be educated in their district. I think the presentation that was just given kind of outlined that, yes, there's certain characteristics of each student that would show us that it would indeed cost a little bit more or a little bit less to educate them. One of the things I really wanted to highlight was the career and technical education component of this study, and how incredibly important it is for us to support advanced career and technical education in the state of Michigan. We're going to have a significant shortage of folks in the workforce that are educated and skilled to do those kinds of tasks that we're going to need them to do, to not just build places like the city of Detroit, but to continue to build places like Pontiac, which are on the upper road, and to make sure that we have enough folks in a diverse workforce, not just diverse in the way that they look, but diverse in talent. One of the other things that I think is incredibly important about this study, and something I'd like to see continue as we look at how to fund education in the state of Michigan, is ensuring that we do have multiple stakeholders at the table. Understanding that children in poverty may not have access to clean drinking water or adequate access to healthy fruits and vegetables, and so their diet may impact the way that they're able to be fed in the morning for breakfast, and if their belly isn't full, they're not going to be able to learn completely. Also understanding that just like we need to have folks who would be involved in career and technical fields, we also need to make sure that the business community is well involved in how we make decisions about our education funding and education curriculum, because we know that education isn't the means to an end. We know that education is a lifelong process. It's also something that's incredibly important for folks to understand, considering it's something that it should not just be ending at 12th grade, something that people need to understand as a value for the rest of their lives. And that it also means that education is important because it helps you determine what your passion is and what your skill set is, and how you can be contributing to society at large. And so whether that's in the business industry, whether it's becoming a teacher yourself, making sure that how we approach education in a holistic manner is going to be incredibly important for the future of the state.
Thank you. Both of my parents were also public high school teachers, and spent a lot of time grading tests and going into my dad's class in particular and watching him teach class, and inspired me to get an education degree, and was going to go into teaching. However, there was no jobs in 1984, so I ended up going into insurance. But it gave me a real appreciation for some of the challenges that teachers go through. And when I was in high school, I took auto shop, machine shop, small engines, welding, just about every one of the vocational classes you could take. Went to the local vocational center for auto shop, and was going to go into auto mechanics. And a friend of mine was just really good at diagnosing mechanical problems, and I realized I was not really going to be a fraction as good as him, so decided to go more into the academic route. But I don't regret for 1 minute the classes that I took. Unfortunately, over the years, I think the whole culture moved to you had to go to a 4-year education, and a lot of kids got left behind and got pushed into schools that in curriculums and colleges that they weren't suited to academically or in terms of an interest. So last year, in this last budget, we funded an additional $100 million for skilled trades training in the high schools, and I really think that's going to make a big difference towards the students who really have an aptitude and interest in going into skilled trades to not be pigeonholed into they have to go to a 4-year school. We also put between 120 and 140 in per pupil in each school this year, which is a good start. It's above inflation, and hopefully we can continue to do that to get those numbers back up. And I know we year over year have worked to get that differential between the the top foundation, or the top funded schools and the lower funded schools to shrink that differential, which I've advocated for every year. Along with, I enjoyed hearing the comments about the categorical for transportation. I've heard comments of schools that are a very small circumference of area that get the same amount of money for a school that sprawls all over the place. And how is a school possibly going to have the same education when a huge part of their per pupil funding is going towards transportation? So I tried to get a categorical in just for transportation. It went into a boilerplate, which means it didn't get passed in law, and then it got taken out of boilerplate somehow. So I'm going to advocate again for that this year and try to make it a bill so it will be ongoing. As far as the study, there's a lot of interesting things I see in the study. I've reviewed it before, and I've not been on transportation in the past, but I hope, well, I'm going to be on transportation, I'm going to back on the categorical. I've not been in the education committee in the past, but I'm going to be this time, so I'll be very interested in diving into the numbers. I know that there is a lot of federal funding too, that it's not that the state doesn't fund or the feds don't fund at-risk students. There's a study I was reading about 6 months ago that the city of Detroit got over 14,000 all in. I mean, the entire funding, and I think it was Trenton got about 7,800 all in, because in the city of Detroit they had a lot more at-risk students, so there was a lot more funding. Same statistic in Lansing. They compared city of Lansing students all in. I think it was around 14,000, and the school not far that was close to half that amount. So there is a lot of money that does come in federally for at-risk students, but it just tells you that we really have to look at these on a case-by-case basis. As the report even pointed out, it's not one size fit all, but I'm certainly open to suggestions. I'm glad we're having this meeting here to continue to learn more. Thank you.
So I'll be very quick, but I do want to say Senator Bayers has spent the last year traveling around her district and has spoken to parents and teachers and students and administrators. And we have our district, District 12, contains school districts that get the least amount of funding, and I think the one that gets the most. And in all of those districts, not a single person thought the funding was done properly. Not a single person in all the districts was happy. So rethinking all of that is really important. I know the senator really believes that we can find some bipartisan agreement on many areas and put the children first. I think we're all about putting the children first, and how are we going to make sure Michigan is not at the bottom of the pack, which is where we really have dropped to since I was in high school in Birmingham.
Thank you, panelists. But now we'll get into the questions from the audience and some written ones. And there are two questions that came up along the same topic. So I'm going to start with that one. And there's a little bit of, this is not me, this is the questioner editorializing or trying to put the question in context. So the first question, the comments are that the school aid fund has been used as the state's piggy bank dating back to the Granholm era. Higher education is supposed to be funded by the general fund, but every year, the past several years, the school aid fund dollars have been diverted to higher education. For fiscal year 2019 alone, about $909 million from the school aid fund went to higher education. That equates to about $614 per K-12 student. Michigan public schools now rank among the bottom states for K-12 achievement. Now, here's the question. The question is, will you support legislation that will dedicate school aid fund dollars to only pre-K to 12 public education? And the companion question that was asked, it went through a similar type of explanation, but it said, would you protect the school aid fund and local revenues from state tax policy changes? They're sort of different because there are tax breaks given to entities, and it impacts the school aid fund in terms of revenue. It's not a direct, as direct as the first question, but it has to do with the amount of resources available for education. So if any of you care to respond to those questions.
I would agree with the way she laid out that first scenario, and yes, that's true that back in the Granholm year years when there was a budget deficit, they took money from the school fund and put it into community college and universities. And I opposed that. I was surprised when I learned that that was done. And it's backfilling that, what was the number again?
909 million?
909 million. And I know the governor has expressed also wanting to do that, and the question to her was, again, where are you going to find the money to fill that? So that's something we're going to have to work on. The other one gets much more complex. I don't think we can even begin to parse out all the details of the complexity of that, but certainly the intent, I think, of the law and what the public wants is that education money to go to K-12 and not universities and community college.
So as recently as the past legislative term, we saw the school aid fund being utilized for things other than education. And something I have opposed in my campaign, and I oppose it as a legislator. We owe it to our constituents to be good stewards of the budget and good stewards of the school aid fund and the general fund. And when we say we're going to use those dollars for something, that's what they need to be used for.
I agree with Representative Manoogian as far as if something's dedicated, especially school aid, not to be used for other purposes. We've been bamboozled before with our gas taxes, same kind of concept. But in response to the question, going from K-12 funding or higher education, or moving funding from higher education, you know, I would have to look and see the numbers, but personally, I would prefer to put more money in K-12, in pre-K, and starting earlier, for earlier childhood education, starting at preschool, because when you start earlier, and we have our laws of the third grade reading laws and being prepared for that, the earlier you start your children, the better position they're going to be. Those children that start in pre-kindergarten programs are that much more ahead of their peers who don't go to those programs starting in kindergarten. They're already reading once they're in kindergarten, typically at that level. And if anybody that's taken early childhood education or psychology courses like that, adolescence, young child development, their brains are learning, they're little sponges, and they get their personality by the time they're 3 to 5 years old, that they're going to have the rest of their life. You start off earlier, you're going to set them up on a path for success later on in life. I'd much rather see money spent earlier in our child's education.
Okay, next question. And this is a funding issue too. Are you in favor, in Steve's report, you mentioned Proposition A. This has to do with Prop A. Are you in favor of repealing or modifying Prop A? And in this legislature, what are the realistic expectations of success? And what will you do in that regard?
So I think that it's clear, given the sort of informal straw poll we took at the beginning of this forum, that no one here believes the funding model is correct. So obviously there needs to be modifications to how we fund public education in our state. I think, to the question of realistic expectations, I think that, and this is sort of a microcosm of what the legislature looks like, but I really look forward to working with Representative Berman. Our offices are right next door to one another. We don't, I believe we might sit on one committee together, but I don't think we sit on, we don't sit on more than one committee together. So I look forward to working with him. I look forward to working with folks across the aisle to make sure that we are putting, as Senator Baer's chief of staff said, putting children first and putting the people of Michigan first. So in terms of realistic expectations, I think that you're probably going to, you could expect to see a lot more cooperation, not just between folks across the aisle in the House of Representatives, but a much more cooperative and collaborative approach to working with our counterparts in the Senate as well. So obviously, this is something that the general public demanded this past election cycle. Folks were talking about public education often, and rightfully so. And I think that, you can expect to see, hopefully, some folks fighting for major changes to the way that we educate children in the state of Michigan.
When the question was raised, was this designed to be the really great funding source for schools? No, that was not the thinking behind it, and that's not what's occurred. The impetus for it was that there were individuals, particularly those on fixed income, who had their taxes, their property taxes increasing to the point where they were running out of their homes. So every time this subject comes up, there's a lot, particularly those elderly, that say, well, no matter what, I don't want to have that reoccur like it happened to people I knew or their parents where they had to leave their home because of the property tax. So I'm just giving you some background that whatever is designed is going to have to ensure that we don't go back to that, because that is the number one thing when this subject comes up, those on fixed income. If you're making lots of money and it's pocket change to pay your property tax, you don't really care about it. But if you're on a fixed income, it literally, I had a discussion on this today with people that were concerned about their property taxes without being tied to funding the schools and having to potentially lose their home. So it's really something that we're going to have to look at that and make sure that's a component that doesn't get lost in this.
I think I can answer this a little bit. Yes, is the answer to that question. And listening to everybody talk, and I know from Senator Bayer, working with Senator Bayer, there seems to be a lot of bipartisan agreement on things have to change and we have to put children first. What does that look like and how that's going to come about, I think really will also depend on people like you and people in the audience really coming and talking to us and giving us ideas, because you're the teachers and you're the parents and you're the administrators and the board members, and you know what you really need. And talking to us will help the legislators come up with good solutions.
What was the question?
The question was, what are your feelings toward Prop A? And
Right, yeah, I mean, realistically, again, we have 110 members in the legislature, we have 38 members of the Senate. Changing Prop A, it's a big burden, and it's not whether change is necessary, again, it's what change. And it's getting everybody to be on the same page and how to go about doing it. So yeah, it sounds great, and a lot of my Republican and Democrat colleagues say, oh yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that. I ran on skilled trades, bringing more skilled trades into the school. Sounds great, Representative Manoogian said the same thing, we need more of that. Everybody agrees, we need that. But again, what does it look like? How much is it going to cost? What's the bottom line? Are those costs where are those costs coming from? Are we going to get rid of a drama program to have wood shop? How is it going in the nitty-gritty? Those details matter. All of it matters, and that's what we need is the input from the local school boards, from the parents, from everybody, because we're all stakeholders. My kids are in the schools here, so in Walden. Again, I have 4 school districts in my legislative district. We have 5, 6, we're all in it together though, okay? And what's it gonna look like? That's what matters.
Thank you. One more funding question. It looks like, and this one's more specific to school safety, and there's been a lot of discussion at the legislative level, and the school district level, statewide, nationally, on the topic of school safety. And this question is rather specific. It says, how should districts fund placing police officers in schools as resource officers?
I know that we put a lot more funding in for school safety this year. I don't have that exact number. I think it was 150 million, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember if that was the exact number, but it was for resource officers, hardening the schools, replacing glass, replacing doors, security system, so there was a lot of funding that went into that. And we may have to continue increasing that number once we are going to do a review this year and see what the results were these changes that schools felt were adequate or not, so that's something I'm sure that will be revisited again this year.
So I know there was a lot of negativity during lame duck, but one of the things I want to reference in reference to this question is the legislation that was passed regarding school safety that happened in December, and I was able to sit on the floor of the House to see that happen. And it's something that I really look forward to continuing to discuss with my colleagues, both in my caucus and of course across the aisle. Making sure, and I think I was just speaking to someone in the audience before this panel started about how different it is. Obviously you can tell I'm not that old, but how different, going to high school in Birmingham was 10 years ago when I was in high school versus going now. I spoke at my high school a few weeks ago and was sort of surprised to see a school safety officer there, and not because I didn't know that the person was there, but because I wasn't ever used to seeing my school have a different entrance to get into the building and having everything locked. And so, even when I was in high school, there was a very different campus environment. And so, understanding that that's the new reality we live in, and whether we like it or not, we're going to need to continue to fund making sure our kids are safe in school. And so there's a lot of bipartisan support for doing that. And again, I know Representative Berman says, what does that sort of look like? I think we have a pretty good idea of what it takes to keep a school safe. And given what was passed in the last legislature, I think it's a good place to start.
So, how should we fund, is the question. I think it depends on how much Chief Patton is going to charge us for the officers. So, we have to look at cost, things like that. I say we take some of our federal 9/11 airline security fee away from the TSA. There's a lot of TSA officers standing around at Detroit Airport. Let's take some of their money and put it at the local level. I don't know. Let's look at some, again, it's all in the details and whether that's even appropriate. In Walled Lake, in my home school district, we did a bond and a millage increase for school safety and security, and that hardened all the schools. We don't have school resource officers in every single school. We do have them in each high school. Walled Lake, Western, Northern, and Central. There's also grants and things that fund those officers. But yeah, every district is unique in which schools and how many buildings, and again, it's what those cost and how to go about doing it. I think the report I saw was it's about $50,000 a year per officer for staffing.
Thank you. The next question has a preface. It says, the recent lame duck session proved to be mostly divided along party lines. After a record 13 days and over 400 bills later, it proved to our citizens that party took precedence over the will of the people. Here's the question. Do you commit to working with both sides of the aisle and Governor Whitmer to have a Michigan that works for our citizens instead of what is best for whichever party you are affiliated, and how do you plan to demonstrate that?
Yes. Yeah, I think looking at what happened and having 400 bills come in, and what was Senator Runstead, what were you at in session one day for 22 hours?
Yeah, 23.
23 hours, that's ridiculous. Having bills pile up. I know in our new legislature, the way and how bills move to the floor has been modified a little bit, that there's going to be more of a deliberative process, so not every single committee can just put a bill out onto the floor, and because most of the time the work is done in committees. That's where testimony, different amendments, all that process takes place. So in this term, only 4 committees. Once it goes through a committee, If it has anything to do with a penalty, it has to go through judiciary. If it has anything with an appropriation tied to it, it's going to go to appropriations. So it's going to get, there's going to be a dual process and another sort of vetting of legislation before it can hit that floor to know that, okay, this is ready to be voted on. So the individual representatives aren't scrambling around looking at things in what happened this past term. I'm looking forward to this process and working with Governor Whitmer, working with my colleagues across the aisle, across the table, and we've already been doing it. And we have a great relationship, and I have a great relationship with my Democratic colleagues. And again, it's, we're not going to agree on every issue. Anybody that's married knows you're not going to agree with somebody 100% of the time, but it's coming to that common ground, coming together. And we're going to agree on fundamentals, or maybe not, but we're going to see where it lies and put the interests, and we've already pledged this, put the interests of our constituents, again, ahead of a party.
I mean, at the risk of saying the same thing a million times, I think that when I ran, for those of you who don't know, my background's in international affairs and diplomacy. And one of the things that I talked about as sort of an overarching, methodology or sort of ethos of the way that I approach things is that I like to work with people who seemingly have not very much in common and find a place where we can agree on something. While this isn't necessarily related to education, I unfortunately, did not get placed on an education committee, but I look forward to advocating for public education in every capacity that I can. But one of the things that, for example, where I think there could be a lot of bipartisan support and work that we can do with our governor's office is, for example, within the Commerce and Tourism Committee, I really look forward to seeing how we can be innovative with our northern ally in Canada. I think that's going to be a great place where we can look at things that they do really well, things that we do really well, and we would like to share with them. I think that that's something that we can do in a bipartisan fashion. I think that's something that is something that we can collaborate on, and we can push forward new innovative policy for the 21st century. And of course, tying that back to education. We know that there are a lot of folks who cross that border every day for work. And understand that there are families that are impacted in that fashion. We've got students from all around the world who are educated in our universities in the state of Michigan, and families who immigrate to this country and who need to be educated, have their children educated in our public school system. So all of those things, I think, are factors that we can come together as in a bipartisan fashion to really do the best thing for our constituents and do the best thing for the state of Michigan.
The lame duck concept has always been around. I think it's unfortunate. There's always been a bill that surfaces every session to get rid of lame duck. I've always agreed and signed on to that. That would say the process has to be the same throughout the entire session, not all these bills at the end. What happens is you'll have members who maybe didn't get a bill, or maybe got one bill, but they had a priority bill, and so they're begging leadership to put this bill up, and so you got this big cluster of bills at the end because they may be leaving for good, and this is the thing that they got elected and they want to get this through. But all of that discussion could have happened through the entire time period. We could have talked about who has a priority bill, and let's get that up for vote and see if it has the support early on through the whole process instead of all clustered at the end. So I would always support getting rid of that. If I was able to wave a wand, I would say we're not going to do that ever again. It's a bad system. As far as us being able to work collaboratively, it absolutely is going to happen, and that is, no matter how somebody wants to be partisan, it's a divided government. So I'm already hearing, which is kind of refreshing from both sides, that, hey, from the Democrat side, we can actually get this bill through. We'll work with the Republicans in here, and the Republicans say, hey, if we work with the governor, and so, so you're hearing this across the board, where it's going to require both sides getting along and coming up with a bill that's going to have support on both sides. It's just dead. So all the time and effort is wasted if you're not working collaboratively. So it's absolutely going to be collaborative governance going through the board, and I've always tried to do that in my, as a committee chair. When I was a committee chair in Oakland County as a commissioner, I said every single Democrat, they're called resolutions, is going to be heard. Every time, every one of them got a hearing and a vote, and I think that's good policy.
I think I can feel very comfortable saying that, yes, the senator will pledge to work across the aisle. That's really important to her. She comes from a background as a computer engineer and a small business owner, and she has spent her whole life working with people from everywhere and across the aisle. And that is really, really important. And I think she would echo what everyone has said. I want to personally add one more component to that. And I, again, think it's really important that the community stakeholders have a voice, and that is going to help all of the legislators and the governor work together. So be heard, speak up, come up, speak up, write, call. We, in our office, I know, take every single call seriously. We log every single call. We know who calls, what they called about, and the senator hears them. So let us know what you think, and let all of your legislators know what you think.
I'm just going to give you a reading, both panelists and audience. It's 8:02. We're going to go to, I've got about 4 more questions that were handed in, and I think we'll go to about 8:15. We got started just a little bit late, and so I think we can get these 4 questions in. The first of the 4, it is sort of a general one, but it says, what do you see as the greatest challenge to public education in Michigan today, and how will you work in the state legislature to alleviate that challenge?
So I think the greatest challenge facing education in the state of Michigan is, quite frankly, the system in which we are operating, where we have for-profit charter operators, we have nonprofit charter operators, we have regular traditional public schools, and understanding that the ecosystem is incredibly complicated, and as we've all said, it's not putting children first, and whatever we've got right now is not working. And so one of the things that I'm quite passionate about and would like to see is ensuring that you cannot make a profit off a child's education in the state of Michigan. That's something that should just not be, it's not tolerated, it's not acceptable. And understanding that there are so many different ways that children learn, understanding that there's many different ends to that pathway through education, whether it's going into a skilled trade or going on to higher education. Understanding all of these different challenges that we are faced with, but I think the #1 issue is that too many folks are profiting off the backs of our children, and that shouldn't be so.
I think that we need to continue increasing the funding to make sure that we have teachers that are wanting to come in for a decent salary and want to stay in the jobs. But there's a corollary issue, and that is conditions. And this is very intractable. It's very difficult. When you talk about education, like I said, when my parents were teaching in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and they both retired in the 80s, the world has changed radically since those days. I've talked to teachers that have been kicked in the shins because they didn't respond immediately to the teacher. They hit the ground like a sack of potatoes. I've talked to teachers that have been hit in the face, had tires slashed, paint thrown on their cars. None of that happened. Not one thing like that happened in my parents' day. So there's a real challenge, even if you're well paid, if you don't have good working conditions. I wouldn't go to work if that was the type of conditions that I had to face. So it's not one thing. It's not one fix, one wave of the wand, and that's going to solve everything. There's a lot of component parts to this. Is why I'm actually going to enjoy going on to education and start doing a deep dive. What are all of the component parts? Because you can't just say it's just this, and you fix just this, and everything's going to be fine in education. It's complex.
I think I can speak that the senator really believes the whole ecosystem, very similar to Representative Murray, needs to be reworked and rethought. And very similar to what really everyone has said.
I like Senator Runstead's answer. It's not, one threat. It's in talking about the whole ecosystem. Initially, I was thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, that's a good question. What's one thing facing public schools or schools? And typically, I say apathy, and that can typically be on looking at the students and parents sending their kids to the schools and not really caring or being involved. And I'm not saying that's happening here in our district, but in other districts. And it's getting these kids engaged. But that's also from other perspectives, teacher perspectives of somebody going into the profession that maybe shouldn't be. We need to engage our kids, and I think it's the skills, having the proper skills. Anybody go to school, go to higher education, graduate, but do they have the skills to be a productive member of society, to get a job? When we have, whatever the last statistics, so many open jobs, and we don't have people with those skills to fill them. And I think that's where bringing the skilled trades back into our schools and preparing our schools with not just a degree, but also certifications where they can do some of these trades, whether it's computers or plumbing, auto, whatever it is, having a concrete skills as well as the fundamental or the basic knowledge of what we are used to.
There are a couple of questions, and there's a handout at your places. One was on the table about the bill that was passed, 5526, I believe, the A to F accountability legislation. And one of the questions had a preface that said that the Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA, and it probably is reiterated in the memo from the State Department of Education, requires that every state have an approved plan that includes accountability rating system. Michigan's federally approved ESSA plan currently is based on the rating system on a 100-point scale of a dashboard. This new law sets up an A to F letter grade system, and it seems like we have parallel accountability systems right now. And for school people in particular, we don't know which one of these is going to take place, and the State Department is saying they don't know. It's really, it's workable. And I guess it might go back to what Senator Runstead was saying with the lame duck. This bill is a part of a lame duck session of 400 bills, and educators hardly had a chance to read it, let alone respond to it. So the question is, do you support the letter A to F rating system? Why or why not? And given that it could jeopardize federal funding, would you support swift action to modify or repeal it before it goes into effect?
The concept behind it, as I understood it, was that it was going to be done on a test basis, and that yes, if it's going to have any negative impact like that, we would be jumping in to modify it. And it was described to me as the dashboard, though it's a lot of great information, is an awful lot of information, and the average parent going through and trying to digest it all, there's very, very few people who would actually do this. So they wanted something that would compare like schools, like socioeconomics of schools. So you don't have a school that's struggling with the at-risk population compared to a very affluent population with a very educated parents. If you have schools that were tiered in a similar socioeconomic basis, and that there was a much more simplistic series of scores that a parent could look at and make that judgment. How that all is going to work out, I don't know. That's something that I'll have to review and will be expecting to review in the next year or two and see if it's having a positive impact or not. At this point, I just simply don't know.
So, if I were on the floor when this came for a vote, I would have voted no. I think something that the senator said regarding it being on a testing basis, I think if I were in committee, I would have advocated for it to be implemented through the Department of Education if it was something that they had wanted to see tested. I don't know that passing the law and then having it be in a testing phase is how things should be done. I think we should do the adequate research and testing prior to passing it into law. I think that, I think the concerns that the Department of Education have raised regarding, questions of overlapping systems of evaluation, trying to understand whether or not we're going to be in compliance with federal law is going to be really important. So I think, what I would really like to see is sort of a determination, both from the federal level and from our Attorney General's office, exactly what this means, and sort of whether or not we'd be able to carry out those laws, and then from there we can proceed as to how we would like to either modify it, keep it, or repeal it altogether.
Yes, again, this being a new law and it not even being put in place yet, I have to see how that does, or if it can be. If there is a system now and this being duplicative, or can it go hand in hand with the system now, or translating the system we have to fit these new requirements, we'll have to see.
So the last question is, this might be the easiest one of the night, I don't know. Local schools should be able to set their own calendar and determine the best fit for their community while providing at least the minimum number of days required by the state. This includes removing the state ban on starting school before Labor Day. Do you believe this? Do you believe in maintaining local control over setting the school calendar and including the start date?
I believe my kids started school before Labor Day this year, so yeah.
So, with regard to local control, the way that the law is currently structured, you can apply for, each school district can apply for a waiver, and typically those waivers are granted, and so, I think that that allows us to maintain a certain level of local control, but also allows for other stakeholders. I was speaking with a constituent earlier about the importance of this, and the law, I remember when this law was created, I was actually still in public school when this law was created, and I remember a big discussion being, other stakeholders, particularly in northern Michigan, and concerns regarding tourism. And so for certain parts of our state, if that's incredibly important for them and for their economies, then of course we need to make sure that they have local control and they can make sure that their school districts meet those standards. And then of course, as I previously mentioned and Representative Berman said, we do have school districts around the state that do start before Labor Day. So making sure that school districts are able to make those determinations based on geography and many other factors is incredibly important.
And I would concur it should be a local control issue. It did not have support in the last session. The loss of local control did not have support.
So that concludes the questions. I'm going to give first of all, I think we need to give the legislators an applause for their and I think I would like just final comments from each one of you, and know along the lines of how we in the local, your constituents, can best communicate with you, work with you on ideas for legislation, and along those lines, so that you set us up, and when we're having issues, what's our best course of action, that type of thing. So if you don't mind.
I will start with contact us. Please contact us. You can reach Senator Bayer at Sen, Bayer, B-A-Y-E-R, at senate.michigan.gov. I will get that email. I will respond, or my constituent relations director will respond, or my legislative director will respond, or the senator will respond directly. We are happy to meet with everyone. You can come up to Lansing and meet with us. We will come down here and meet with you. We are in the district primarily Mondays and Fridays, and we are setting up meetings with pretty much anyone who asks. So please contact us. We would really love to hear what you think.
Well, thank you for coming out and attending. I know it's a snowy night, late on a Thursday, and it takes some commitment to come out and participate in this program. So thank you. In terms of getting in touch with me, there's a couple of ways. You can call the office, you can email, or you can attend my coffee hours. I did coffee hours every month with very few exceptions. When I was a state representative for 4 years, I had my staff count up my hours of coffee hours and town halls, and I had the most of any legislator as a state representative, and I want to continue that as a state senator. So you could come to the coffee hours and talk to me one-on-one. I've got school board members who do that. One is at almost every single coffee hours, and he gets up, and whenever I go to a teacher's meeting, and says, Representative Runstead answers every question I have and is completely accessible in every way. If he calls, he comes to Lansing, he comes to my office. I welcome him at every one of those, as I would everybody here. So you're welcome to come coffee hours. You can call the office. If at coffee hours somebody says they called the office or they sent an email and it was not responded to, I have Linda Heiduck is my in-district liaison, and she takes a note of that. That is back conveyed to my staff, and I say that is not happening twice. Every call, every email is going to be responded to, and it is. So as far as other things you can do is some of the best bills and legislation I get come from constituents. There was actually that one board member was the one advocating that I added that categorical one for transportation. That came from him, and like I said, I tried in every way to push it through, and it didn't make it through, but today's a new day. There was another one that some schools were actually building dormitories with foundation grant allowance and then taking private tuition dollars that were sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. And I thought, why should private foundation grant allowance be building these dormitories when other schools are struggling just to pay their bills? So I put in a bill to prevent that. It got put into boilerplate, but I'm going to try to make that a bill going forward. So any ideas you have, contact the office, come to my coffee hours. I'd love to be able to communicate with each of you individually. Thank you.
I'll be very brief, but the best way, as everyone else has said, to reach out to our office is either via phone or via email. I'm always happy to meet with you, whether it's in the district or in Lansing. And my email is house.mi.gov. So just make sure you send us an email. We respond pretty quickly, and so we're really happy to answer any questions or concerns. The other thing I wanted to make sure I highlight for all of you that you can grab on your way out is Senator Bayer's chief of staff brought flyers for our upcoming joint coffee hour that we're going to be having at the Bloomfield Township Auditorium a week from this Sunday. The coffee hour is going to be from 12:15 to 1:15, and the time is a little goofy because we'll be attending Congresswoman Haley Stevens' swearing-in ceremony afterwards, and we'd love to have you join us there as well. So just make sure you reach out to us. I really took pride in being accessible when I was a candidate, and I want to continue that accessibility as your representative.
Same here. My door is always open. It's not my office. It's our office. It's the office of the 39th district. It's open anytime. Anytime you guys want to come to Lansing and meet. And obviously, if you don't want to make that drive in the winter, I'm down here and in district. And Mondays and Fridays, I'll have in district office hours next week at the Commerce Township Library. But I'm willing to meet my constituents anywhere. My email address is ryanberman@house.mi.gov. And I had to pull that out because I was getting confused. Because my last one was like mail.gov.
Yeah.
But anybody can grab my card afterwards, come up to me. My cell phone number is 248-956-0009. Hit me up on Facebook. I'm open. I'm available. I'm your representative. If I'm in the 39th. But if you have any complaints, then please contact your senator, Senator Runstead.
On behalf of the Parent Communication Network and the West Bloomfield Board of Education, we thank all of you for committing to come out this evening and sharing your thoughts. We're excited to hear about the new collaborative spirit in Lansing. We will definitely remind everybody of that as we go through. And collaboration doesn't mean total agreement. I agree with the representative. He said, you work through issues, you find common ground. And I think that on our part, as a public educator or your constituents. We know that your job is tough, and our job is to try to communicate to you as clearly as we can what the issues are from our perspective, and to offer you the kind of support and information that you need to make the best decisions on behalf of the state, the students in the state, and we wish you well, because if you do well, our students will do well. So thank you, and have a good evening.